missing. What the fuck? Bro. Okay. everybody. We'll be getting started just shortly. Still waiting on one of our guests to make it into the Discord.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah, that's that one guy, though, you said was going to join us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Can't wait. Great.
Yeah. He's been paying attention, very close attention to China and everything that we're going to be talking about. So, let me go ahead and get us going on here. By that, I mean, there you go.
Then,
yeah, no problem. That later.
So,
where are you? Anywho, ready? Yeah, when you're ready, you are. That was minutes ago. Told me he needs to jump in a server. I'm gonna put everything on mute real quick, and I'm just gonna give him a Discord call because.
Right, we'll see you in a minute.
Yeah. Hey, so my Discord just crashed, everybody. So yeah, we're having some minor technical difficulties.
I started putting in my pen. Like, oh god.
We can hear you, Ty. I'm gonna mute him. Oh. All right. Yeah, experiencing some minor technical difficulties, everybody. Sorry. We'll be getting started shortly, though. We're talking a lot about China. And you know what? It's fine. This is going to be cut up and everything anyways when we post it onto YouTube, but, you know. Okay. Well. Okay, well, we're going to be right back once everybody gets back into the room. So, yeah, sorry, everybody. This is bad, but sometimes it happens. So I'll go ahead and just like talk while waiting on people. Yeah, so this is Cypher State. Cypher State is a foreign affairs and oh, okay, never mind. So Region Taiga is back. Did Discord crash for you as well, man?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also letting me turn the video. Oh, maybe I have to do it from here. Or no, that started the video call. No.
So there's are you using the web browser or are you using the application?
The app.
Okay, so if you click on the room and you're joined it right now. So click on the room again, and it'll bring up the video screen, and then you'll be able to highlight it. And there's a turn on camera option at the bottom.
Boom, got it.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, it's not intuitive. So yeah, once you do that, then you'll have to just allow it and blah blah blah, and it should come up. But yeah, I had Discord crash on me and all sorts of stuff just happened in the last 2 minutes. So, but yeah, so once you get your stuff up, Travis, we'll be good.
Right, it's a good day.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and do this. Disable. I don't know why it crashed and then everything else. Let's see. Okay, I have to move stuff around just slightly. Let's shrink us down just a tad. This down just a tad.
That Midwesterner in you is coming out.
What? Oh,
that
tad.
Midwesterner is coming. Yeah, just tad.
Just a tad. Oh, good. All right. Oh, he just crashed again. What is going on with Discord today? Man. I'm gonna go ahead and give him the role to see the channel too, so I don't have to drag him in next time.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. To your question about like why we had it set up this way, we had open calls, and a couple of times while we're in the middle of like talking about stuff, people just jumped in while we were talking about it, and it like threw off the flow when it was like 5 of us, and So yeah.
Separate that real quick. So what a lot of people keep doing in Discord, that's really annoying to me, is that they can lock people out, but you can still see the room.
Yeah.
For some reason, people keep making it to where people are locked out and they can't see the room, and I'm like, why? Like, you can show people that you're there, they just can't get in. And that yeah, that irritates the hell out of me on any Discord server, just because it's like, hey, we understand you all have a private room. We understand that you can't, you restrict access into getting in.
There we go. We got it. All right, cool. But yeah, we did that just because we didn't want, people jumping in, and it was just easier to just have it hidden when we did it, and haven't changed it since. All right, so we got 3 people in the room now. Let me resize the Discord window so it makes sense. So nobody's like, actually, I can just do this. I don't need to resize the Discord window. I just need to move. This is going to be such a jacked fucking stream of the recording. My God. Okay, there we go. I just needed to move the 3 little bubbles of us talking so people can know who's talking when. Okay. Official start, everybody. All right. This is Cypher State, and I am the host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast, as well as Cypher State. And Cypher State is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast where we dive deep into an issue facing the geopolitical stage. Today, I am once again joined by Tiberius D. Tiberius, how are you doing?
Sorry.
Good.
Hello, sir. How are you doing?
Good, man. I'm hoping you're doing well as well. Hope you got some reprieve from the last time we talked. So, hope that went well for you.
Your support always means a lot, so I really appreciate it.
Great. And joining us on the program for a second time, or third. Actually, this is probably 3rd time now, isn't it? 3rd or 4th?
Third, yeah, 3rd or 4th, something like that.
3rd or 4th time is Travis Scott. Travis, how are you doing today?
I'm all right. I have to excuse the somewhat janky setup since I'm not at the office currently. I'm on I'm on military training duty for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In sunny California, so it's first weekend knocked out. So yeah, happy to join.
It's all good. So I'm glad you were able to join us. And this was a topic that that is near and dear to your heart, and I know it's near and dear to Tiberius's heart as well. But I don't like Tiberius. We don't like it. We interact a lot, but we don't interact as much as Travis and I interact, because we've been in the same Facebook communities and like circles for like 3 years or so. So this is something that like he's been bringing up a ton, and I've learned a lot of what's going on in China from his shares, the reporting he's been doing, the analysis he's been doing. And so that's why I wanted to get both of you in on this program. And so I'm glad that you're able to join us, Tiberius. So the way this is going to work is that I'm going to basically do a little bit of a news recap of what's happened in the last like month or so, but it's going to be expansive. And what we're going to want to focus on, though, is those instances of what is happening in China and how China and Xi Jinping, in which we're calling this the Xi Jinping sting and the woes it brings, is the name of the episode, because I think it's funny.
Oh man, that is perfect. That is perfect.
And we're going to talk about all those things, but also give some background to it. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's episode of Cypher State. And the topic today is China. And we're calling this episode the Xi Jinping sting and the woes it brings. And there is no shortage of timely news to talk about. So we're going to bring you up to some of the speed about what has been happening in China, and then get into analysis and additional backgrounds in that. So just today, Turkey had announced that it will seek membership into the China-led Shanghai Cooperation Organization, otherwise known as the SCO. Turkey has been affiliated with the SCO since 2013, when it signed a partnership agreement. If successful, Turkey would be the first NATO member to join the bloc. The move is seen as an attempt by Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to forge alliances with friendly countries in the East. Full membership of the bloc would give Erdogan renewed leverage against the West and the prospect of stronger economic ties as the government attempts to stabilize a troubled economy ahead of next year's election. The announcement followed the SCO's meeting in Uzbekistan on Friday, where he held talks with leaders including China's President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Apart from Russia and China, the 8-member SCO also includes India, Pakistan, and Kazakhstan. Earlier this month, the United Nations released their assessment of human rights concerns in Xinjiang, sorry, say again?
Xinjiang.
Xinjiang, sorry. Ugh. All the Z's are messing with me.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
So earlier this month, the United Nations released their assessment of human rights concerns in Xinjiang, the Uyghur Autonomous Region. The long-delayed report noted that China's detentions of Uyghurs and other predominantly Muslim ethnic groups may have amounted to international crimes, including crimes against humanity. The report also raises concerns about torture or ill treatment at detention camps, which China refers to as vocational education training centers. Bullshit, right? John Fisher, the global advocacy deputy director at Human Rights Watch, said in a statement, quote, the UN human rights chief for the first time lays bare the Chinese government's grave abuses and concludes they may amount to crimes against humanity. Victims and their families, whom the Chinese government has long vilified, have as long last seen their persecution recognized and can now look to the UN and its member states for action to hold those responsible accountable. Angrily dismissing the report, the foreign ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin said, quote, the assessment is a patchwork of false information that serves as political tools for the US and other Western countries to strategically use Xinjiang to contain China. It again shows the UN Human Rights Office has been reduced to an enforcer and accomplice of the US and other Western countries. Chinese diplomats are speaking out and lobbying at an ongoing session of the Human Rights Council in the hopes of thwarting and a possible call for further scrutiny, even as they prepare to attend the UN General Assembly in New York this week. Beijing looks to the UN, where it can count on support from countries it has befriended and in many cases assisted financially, as a counterweight to US-led blocs such as the Group of Seven, which have grown increasingly hostile towards China. This plays out against the backdrop of China's economic slowdown. According to Bloomberg News, that reporting that came out on Friday, that the Chinese economy projected growth this year has slowed to about 3%, missing the government's target of 5.5% by an embarrassingly wide margin, And throughout history, economists have known that the government's estimates and official numbers have been anywhere between 2 and 3 percentage points off. Full percentage points, meaning if they're saying 3%, it might be closer to 1%. Now, after decades of expansion, that would be the second worst performance in more than 40 years. Only 2020, with its COVID-induced recession, was worse. Fuel prices are rising thanks to Russia's war in Ukraine. The overbuilt housing industry is teetering on the brink. And President Xi Jinping's draconian COVID-0 lockdowns have created havoc, most recently in technologically heavy Chengdu. Mostly gone are American concerns about China overtaking the United States to claim the title of the world's largest economy. Economists say that the date has been postponed to 2023 or later, and a few suggest it might not happen at all now. China has faced long-term challenges that won't go away, beginning with an onrushing demographic decline. The United Nations projects that China's population will shrink by roughly 40% by the end of the century, from 1.4 billion people to a mere 800 million or so. Some demographers say that decline will be steeper. Either way, India will soon take the number one seat. The population decline stems from a low birth rate, which also means China's population is aging and its workforce is shrinking. Its sputtering economic growth has rippled into the rest of the economy with mixed results. According to a Bank of America that note to the clients, China is facing headwinds that will set the tone of the US, Europe, and Latin America as they respond to currency and commodity markets. One of their top priorities right now, may be after Taiwan, is to avoid condemnation by the Human Rights Council. The self-governing island of Taiwan is claimed by China as its sovereign territory, an issue that the Beijing government is ferociously and internationally about. Is ferocious about internationally. James A. Warren, writing for the Daily Beast, notes it's next to impossible to find a serious student of international affairs or military strategy who doesn't think that the strategic relationship between the United States and the People's Republic of China has reached a new nadir. After Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan was announced, Beijing initiated its most ambitious series of naval exercises in the vicinity of Taiwan yet. Those exercises amounted to more than saber rattling. They were nothing short of a rehearsal for just the sort of blockade the People's Republic of China would attempt in order to coerce Taiwan into major concessions on its sovereignty, or to launch a combined arms amphibious assault of the island. Xi and other Chinese Communist Party colleagues shared the belief that the United States is a declining power, no longer suited for leadership in international affairs generally, let alone in its neighborhood. This belief is a highly destabilizing factor for the US-Chinese relationship, as it tends to fuel Beijing's sense that America lacks the will to defend its interest and allies in East and Southeast Asia. Most Western and international relations and China scholars reject Beijing's depiction of its new assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region as an integral part of its quote-unquote peace rise, and believe it is pursuing a strategy of regional hegemony in Asia. Taiwan has a military of 300,000 members and more than 400 jet fighters, but the primary deterrent preventing Beijing from seizing the island by force has been the military might of the United States. For 40 years, Washington's policy of strategic ambiguity has been successful in both deterring China from seizing the island by force and dissuading the Taiwanese from declaring full independence, an act which various People's Republic of China officials have said would be an open provocation of war. Current U.S. policy officially recognizes the PRC as the sole Chinese nation, but also promises military and political support for Taiwan. And that brings us up to speed. So, I know that's a bit long-winded, but I think it's important because it gives us the backdrop of everything that we want to talk about today. So, Travis, Tiberius, come at me. What are some of your thoughts about this? What is the top concern of this that is in your mind?
I have half a page of notes, but I'm gonna let him. I'm gonna let Travis go first on this one.
Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah. So, couple of things in terms of, well, first of all, what's top of mind that I think from an international view, which would be the biggest source of concern, would be Taiwan. On the subject of strategic ambiguity, I'm not quite sure that we could quite call it a success. But to zoom out a little bit, it's not so much that the United States military, which to an extent it has been a deterrent, it's more so the regional alliances that have been set up in these last couple of years that have sort of acted as a more as a much larger deterrent. So, for example, there's the Quad. So the Quad was basically the brainchild of the former, now late Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and the Quad is an alliance between the United States, Australia, India, and the UK. I don't know, or is it France? Well, anyway, one of
It's
those.
Australia.
Australia. Okay, okay. Yeah, United States, Australia, Japan, and there's one more there, India.
India.
So, yep. So this alliance of these four militaries, as far as the Asia Pacific is concerned, is basically the biggest strategic wedge that China has in the region. Now, with regard to the idea of Taiwanese independence, so the viewpoint of the current party that's in power in Taiwan, their idea, their viewpoint is, yeah, there's only one China, that's mainland China, that's the People's Republic of China. But as far as identity, we're Taiwanese. So as Taiwanese people, we're independent, we're not subject to China. So that's essentially the viewpoint that most Taiwanese people on the island locally see themselves,
Right.
as well as as that's basically their solution and the viewpoint and philosophy that they see that sort of gets around that one China rule. Because prior to that, when the KMT, the Kuomintang, the previous Chinese Nationalist Party that fled to Taiwan was set up, it was basically a fight over who gets to be called China: the Republic of China, which is Taiwan's official government, or the People's Republic of Taiwan, which is the mainland. The Democratic People's Party, which is the party that Tsai Ing-wen, the current president of Taiwan, is the leader of, they pretty much seek to sort of separate their identity and focus specifically on the fact that, hey, we're Taiwanese. Our identity, though we share a heritage with China, we are our own country, we're our own identity.
Okay. I think that's a fair point. Just Travis, just for your FYI, you're lagging a lot, and it might be either because you're on your
and it
laptop.
might be it might be both the laptop and the mercy of the hotel Wi-Fi. So
Okay.
yeah, I kind of noticed that myself as well. Like I said, I'm kind of at the mercy here. Be right back, grab a charger to see if that'll help out.
Well, one of the things, if you can still hear me, one of the things that might help is disabling the background that you have set up on there. That usually uses a bit of processing power that's not needed. But anyways, Tiberius, you said you have a half page of notes. So
Yes.
what do you got besides
all right,
the
so
Taiwan stuff?
There's a lot I have here, but I'll start with largely, if you will call it, the strategic situation that we have going on between the United States and China, and kind of like focus down on Taiwan, because I absolutely agree in the notion that the United States is largely somewhat responsible for keeping Taiwan independent in regards to it's basically the United States Navy that has been kind of the bulwark, or assumed the bulwark, for the independence of Taiwan. I'm not 100% going to agree with it, but let me roll that back a little bit. When it comes to the United States and China's relations, I've predicted for a long time that sooner or later somebody was going to wake up one day and be like, these are two powers that absolutely have no interest in helping one another. The fact that we had the trade relation go as long as we have absolutely blew my mind. And when I saw Trump openly being like, we're going to tariff China, Huawei is a serious cybersecurity concern. All of these were starting to line up to where I'm like, all right, the Americans are starting to wake up to the fact that China is not their friend. Now, there was a lot of people it's just like, oh, there's not going to be a new Cold War. There's not going to be a new Cold War. And I'm like, sooner or later, I know I'm right on this. There is going to be a second Cold War. Okay. But this has been something that has been far more delayed than what I thought was ever going to come. The fact that the Bush administration did absolutely nothing to China, the fact that the Obama administration did absolutely nothing in regards to China, literally blew my mind. Like, this was an issue in 2006 for me. Like, even before I really got into the geopolitical arena, like, just knowing, like, practical politics as a freshman in high school, I recognized that this was a looming confrontation that was, eventually going to fire off. The fact that the United States has been so delayed in actually responding to it shows the quality of leadership that we have. But just to show that I'm not crazy here, actually this week, which I'm surprised you didn't get in your news outlet, was a pretty big news, is that the United States has now banned aircraft sales, or basically the airframe sales.
The
China.
Right.
And the F-35 was affected by that as well.
Yes, and there's a bit of a counter sanction going on because the F-35 has some alloys that has been made out of China that was imported here. Kind of in the same way that in the SR-71 was built with titanium that was from the Soviet Union. We're kind of having the same issue again. So fun times. Domestic security production is really on the table again. I would absolutely expect the Biden administration to respond with the National Security Act regarding dealing with those resources. I don't know where else they're going to secure it because we have absolutely turned China into the world's manufacturing point. Yes, U.S. banned the sales of airframes. There is openly flights now being canceled between the United States and China. Direct flights, from like Shanghai to Los Angeles, Shanghai to Seattle. There's been 28 canceled in the last week. Don't get me wrong, it's not a lot, but that's on the table. And I will still reiterate that cybersecurity is still a huge issue. Republicans are banging on this a lot more than Democrats are, but security concerns with what is made and sold through the Chinese system is their intellectual property, and they will 1000% take your data that they get from the products that are made, and they will use it to their own ends. When it comes to Taiwan, I would like to split a little bit of hairs here. Number one, people saying that Taiwan can't defend itself was always a bit of a jump for me. In the fact that a lot of people assume that, China's building this big navy and they have the world's biggest army. They're going to be this huge, competent military force. I absolutely have disagreed from that from the start. We thought the Russians were going to be a problem, and we had a lot of reasons to believe that. We absolutely have no reason to assume that the Chinese are going to be a problem for two particular reasons. Number one, they have not fought a war since the 1970s, and we're talking the early 1970s. And remind you, they basically got quote unquote smacked by the Vietnamese after we had fought them. So,
and a lot of people don't know about that war, don't know about the Sino-Vietnamese war, but the Viet Cong,
it was bad.
Face.
It was bad. The other side of this is that where the United States maintains a very professional force of volunteers, the Chinese do have some level of integrated draft system, some level of not. But the big thing that we know is a serious issue is that what we used to call political commissars are largely still a major issue. And if it's not openly a commissariat system, the vast majority of the officer corps we know are yes men. They are not promoted for competence. They are promoted because of political affiliation. And
especially now with the current leader, Xi Jinping.
Yes, I'm not going to say just openly discount the Chinese and being a combat effective force, but from everything that we've seen regarding how capable their weapon systems tend to be when they actually hit the field, all the way up to the fact that their enlisted corps is in question, and we know their officer corps is junk. I guarantee you the reason that we saw the Chinese completely change their rhetoric 2 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine was because if the Russians can't take on, a force like that, China is going to die horribly to the Taiwanese. So I'll take that section, kind of cordon that off, and we can get back to some of my other notes later.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand, especially with the Russia thing, because for the last, 30, 40 years or so, we've turned Taiwan into a giant porcupine, giving it all kinds of surface-to-air missiles, all kinds of short-range missiles, all kinds of capabilities to take on any kind of naval. What's the proper word? Beach. They're turning its beachhead into a killing zone, essentially, right?
Yep.
And so China can probably at this juncture, assuming the United States doesn't get involved, could potentially still take over Taiwan, but they're going to lose millions of people in the process. Like, there's going to be so many sunk ships, and those ships aren't very good to begin with. Travis, you got a little bit more experience given your world background than I do about this, so maybe you can talk a bit more about that. But yeah, I don't see it going good for China.
I was going to add, and so far, a lot of our analysis so far has been from the Western perspective.
Yeah.
But to really sort of get it, you also have to look at the domestic perspective of what's going on inside of China now, and then its political structure historically. So Tiberius was right on the money when he was talking about the yes men sort of culture that exists. That's pretty much a standard, really, of the CCP. That's kind of how things work. But to sort of answer his question, or the bewilderment of why we're just now reacting to China and I guess its threat on the world order of things, it really has to do with the changes of leadership. So, just to sort of real quick summary, Mao Zedong is pretty much the one that stepped in when China became the People's Republic of China and ruled mainland China proper. At that time, the whole idea behind the Great Restoration, which killed millions of people, was that we were going to try to be, self-sufficient and follow the Soviet style. Then his replacement comes in, Deng Xiaoping. At that same time, the Soviet Union begins to decline. So Deng Xiaoping looks at the Soviet Union and goes, "Well, their style doesn't work. So we have to go with this new model." And that's when you hear the mantra socialism with I believe it's socialism with Chinese standards or something like that.
Socialism with Chinese characteristics.
Characteristics, yes, yes. That phrase was coined by Deng Xiaoping. The idea of, hey, we're gonna open up markets in a limited level and try to sort of balance market points so that we can have stable growth. After he goes in, this is the turning point. Jiang Zemin. Now remember that name because this is going to be important. Jiang Zemin, as the third prime minister in this whole process, decides, hey, we're just going to go barnstorm and open the country up as much as we can, because the easiest way that we can keep the people in line is to keep them fat and happy with money. So at the time that Xi Jinping came in, that's when, kind of started working on joining the WTO and all of this sort of things and opening world market foreign investment, really trying to court all of that. He comes in, Hu Jintao then comes in, which Hu Jintao was empowered in the Obama administration. He pretty much stays the same course that Jiang Zemin does. He does start to crack down on Tibet. It was under his administration that the whole Tibet humanitarian crisis took place. And then finally, that leaves us with Xi Jinping. With Xi Jinping, basically, as far as the structure and how things work on the ground, he more or less seems to be trying to revert to more of a Maoist structure in China, where the state controls the majority of the economic source of production and the industry there. Prior to assuming his power, another thing that he did was he cracked down on all of his rivals within the CCP. A big mistake, a big sort of misconception that we have is we sort of think the CCP is monolithic. It really isn't. It's basically a sort of Game of Thrones style rivalry between different factions, and it's basically whoever can backstab the most and has the hardest amount of leverage basically assumes power, and that's exactly what Xi Jinping did. Basically, he put himself in the part of the CCP that deals with corruption, and basically under the false pretense of corruption went after all of his factions by arresting their family members, and then the factions themselves, deposing them. That's how he was able to get the momentum to allow the Chinese constitution to be amended so that he can serve an unlimited amount of terms.
And this was very popular as well, right? Like, it was extremely popular among the Chinese people. Well, no, I think it was, legitimately.
No, it was because, well, first off, when it comes to, you have to understand, like, Chinese people now, first of all, the average Chinese person my age has never even heard of Tiananmen Square. Like, to really understand how invasive Chinese propaganda and their state media machine works. Yes, he's correct. The people, though it's manufactured, the support of amending the Constitution to allow unlimited terms was supported by the public. But all that really matters is whether you can get the Politburo, the CCP, to go along with that. And the way that he was able to do that was by eliminating any and all of his opposition, which brings us into where
Yeah.
we are now and what that has to do with Taiwan. One of Xi Jinping's pledges before taking power was to reunify the country by bringing in Taiwan. So he still has to sort of live by that example. However, zero COVID and even that the pandemic and the sort of perception that has left to China with the rest of the world has put a major hamper in that. There's a lot more distrust in China by the international community than there has been in quite some time, particularly because of the way they handled COVID and the way that they hid information and the lack of transparency, so forth and so forth and so forth. And then because that their shift in diplomacy. So China, the official word for it is wolf warrior diplomacy. Fun fact: there's a movie on Netflix which is where this name comes from called Wolf Warrior. So it's basically like their answer to Top Gun. It's actually fairly entertaining, but you really just 2 minutes watching it, it really lays on thick. Like, yeah, this is a Chinese propaganda recruitment tool, but that movie spawned the whole idea of wolf warrior diplomacy, and that's why when you always hear an interview or speeches from their diplomats, you kind of hear the sort of fiery, aggressive rhetoric that you hear, which doesn't have a lot of action followed before it. You mentioned the drills earlier. From our perspective, it seemed like the drills were a big deal, but what a lot of people don't know is that about 3 days into the deal, Taiwan had already had redirected a lot of its shipping traffic and shipping lanes, and also with assistance with Japan and Australia. So the drills were not nearly as disruptive to Taiwanese way of life as the West sort of depicted it as. WEON, which is based in India, and a couple other sources in NHK, they basically said, well, it was just amount to just fireworks and saber rattling, but it wasn't particularly disruptive to the way of life. Now, the key thing about what they do with Taiwan is going to see if is based on if Xi Jinping believes that this will sort of be the distraction that he needs to sort of get the attention off of what's going on in China domestically. You touched upon it a lot in your intro, and while the word crisis gets thrown around a lot, like even in some cases in the United States, in China it is exactly that. You mentioned their growth target being 3%. It's been the actual number is 2.7, but you're right. More realistically, it's probably around 1. The real thing to note is the last time the United States will have a growth rate that's faster than what China has. The last time that's happened was 1994, which ironically was the same year of Tiananmen Square. But yeah, it's bad there. The zero COVID policy has basically increased China's youth unemployment to over 20%.
Wow.
There was
I didn't know it was that
already
bad.
two, yeah, there was already two protest movements that are going on in China right now, which is kind of funny because it's sort of echoing in the United States, but to a much lesser extent. You probably heard of the whole quiet quitting scenario.
Yep.
Well, in China, they had a similar movement that started roughly about a year and a half ago, called the Tongting movement or lay flat movement, which is basically not like you do your job, but it's basically you do the bare minimum necessary to live, and you don't really try to go the extra mile or try to move up the economic ladder because by their perception, it's just basically useless to even try. We remember the Jack Ma era, he sort of brought in the whole the 996 work philosophy. Well, that
Hmm.
basically burned out an entire generation. You mentioned the low birth rate. The reason why that, well, besides the economy, the major cause of that low birth rate was decades of the one child policy. Because in most families, it's favorable to have a son rather than a daughter. So most
Yep.
of the time, if they ended up with daughters, the vast majority of time they would either abort them, but if they decide to go to carry it full to term, they would give those women up for adoption. So they would be adopted overseas and in other countries. So as a result, it basically led to a gender disparity where essentially you had around for every 9 men, there was like one suitable woman to marry. And that's why a lot of like wealthy Chinese people, they either travel to other countries or move to other countries to find a white wife and then travel back home if they do that. But the marriage prospects in China's been low, and then because of the economic strain that's happening because of the high work culture and the extreme cost of living, families just have put off childbirth. So China tried to alleviate this by saying, hey, at first, like about a decade ago, we're going to get rid of the one child policy and make a two-child policy. That didn't work. Then it was, we're going to have a three-child policy. That didn't work. So now it's actually at the point where there are PSAs that air in China right now, and I've seen people show me them on Douyin, which is basically like have as many children as you can. It is your national civic duty to have children, which is crazy to me to even think about. But that's how bad the birth rate situation is over there right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then as far as what else zero COVID has done, so the areas, if zero COVID had been done in other areas of China, it wouldn't probably have the impact that it did. But the issue is that the lockdowns have occurred in the most strategically important areas in China. So you mentioned Chengdu earlier. So Chengdu is in the Sichuan province. It's about to the northeast. That is the most important area in China as far as its manufacturing goes. If you have an iPhone or Apple device or anything made by Foxconn, there's about a 4 in 5 chance that it came from Sichuan province. And those are the areas that are being locked down. The next is its sort of economic crown jewel, which is Shanghai. That's their tier 1 city. Shanghai was under lockdown near end of March and through April. And because of that, it's basically traumatized their public. So you can find videos literally of the way things work is you have an app around you, right? It's either red or green. If it's red, it basically means either you have COVID or the area around you has a certain rate of infections. So the area around you will go through a controlled lockdown. Well, imagine, if you will, in Hainan, which is to the south, that's about the closest island to Taiwan. That's essentially their resort. They call it the Hawaii of China. But anyway, imagine you're at an IKEA in Hainan, and all of a sudden they say that the building is going to go in lockdown. Everybody receives the same message, and there's a stampede of people trying to flee from an IKEA because they're afraid of getting locked out. Because by the time they close those doors, you're not going to be able to leave until they say the lockdown is over. And just basically echo this same way of life in now 7 cities, Shenzhen, Chengdu, Wuhan, Shanghai, and just it's bad. And then you have the drought, which dried up the Yangtze River. The main source of power in that region is the Three Gorges Dam, which draws power from the flow of the rivers. Because they develop those dams and it doesn't properly allow enough water to replenish the waterways, basically they have rolling blackouts there. So for people living in Chengdu, not only are they having to deal with lockouts, but they're having to deal with blackouts. Then they had a 6.9 earthquake 2 weeks ago.
Jesus
and
Christ.
People were unable to leave the area because of the zero COVID lockdown. So imagine you want to evacuate, you want to get your family out because there's a little earthquake going on, but you can't get out because your doors are bolted shut. There's fences built in. Like it is bad. It is bad. We even touched upon the property, banking, and housing crisis. Like it is,
and we're gonna have to, especially. I wanted to pick up on something that you had said a lot earlier, was when you were talking about the one China policy and how men have gone overseas to find wives.
Yeah.
And one of the primary places they have done that in, I don't think a lot of people notice, is Uzbekistan, correct? Like I'm not wrong about that one. And that's causing other issues because China's kind of racist as well. So, I mean, and not only that, there was an interesting thing that was also happening. Now, this has since been changed is my understanding, but in some of the books, it went in some of the sexual health books in middle school, I'll say probably the equivalent of, They actually weren't necessarily promoting being gay, but they're saying it was no longer bad and that it's fine, as another way to deal with, for lack of a better term, excess male population not being able to find companionship with women. Well, hey, maybe you're gay and you can just go live with your best friend. It's fine. It's fine.
Romance, man. Times are hard, bro.
But and then the other thing I wanted to bring make a fine point on is that all of the cities you mentioned have immense population density. We're talking like population density like New York times 2. Like these are highly dense, highly populated areas that you're literally shoving people into, like, what, 600 square feet apartments, if that, for weeks at a time.
Tier 1 and what China calls tier 1 and tier 2 cities. Yep.
Man, that is going to cause so many problems in the future because of the amount of mental health breakdown that's going to happen from these cascading zero COVID policies, some of which is being done, which we haven't touched on yet, but some of it is being done for Xi Jinping to cement more power within himself, but also because the Chinese medical system simply cannot deal with with a COVID wave. It can't deal with it. It's still a highly rural area. They don't have enough hospitals and doctors and staff to meet their population needs. If there's a huge COVID wave, you're talking about, the things that happen in like New York and other major cities in the United States where they're having morgues run out of space. You're talking about that in China, even with Omicron, simply because they don't have the infrastructure for it. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. So I needed to put that point on that too.
Yep, and to be clear, like Cypher, you and I have gotten to many a debate with a tanky, and the constant thing that they talk about. Well, as socialists, they have first of all, China specifically does not have universal healthcare, and they barely have a healthcare infrastructure. If you do not live in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, I would actually just say those 3 cities. If you don't live in either of those 3 major cities, you don't have access to real healthcare. You have access to someone who basically calls himself a doctor, but is incapable of, if you have anything serious, of really getting you real help. People who have real health crises in China, if they have the means, they fly out of the country, they travel out of the country and go somewhere else. They do not have a true healthcare system there. You mentioned that the zero COVID policies was also a political hint to it. And that's why I said, remember the name Jiang Zemin. So the only sort of faction that has the strength to really oppose and be a thorn in Xi Jinping's side in the CCP is the so-called Shanghai faction. So Jiang Zemin is still around. He may not be the prime minister anymore, but after he stepped down and made way for Hu Jintao, he basically still wielded most of the influence. And part of the reason why is because he was in charge of the region, the province that includes Shanghai. So, and ironically enough, Xi Jinping also came from that same faction originally. So Jiang Zemin, before Xi Jinping, was basically a kingmaker. Now, when Xi Jinping came into power, his primary goal, besides getting rid of his opposition, is also to keep Jiang Zemin's power in check. Because since he resided over China's sort of golden years and he's responsible for making a lot of people in the CCP rich, he carries a lot of weight, he carries a lot of waver. So there's a lot of people who believe that the reason why Xi Jinping was willing to enforce a lockdown in Shanghai, their most important city, their top 1-tier city, was to send a message to specifically the Jiang Zemin faction of the CCP that no one is quote unquote above the law and you better get in line.
And so Travis and I have been going back and forth a lot, Tiberius. I know that you have notes and you have things that you want to talk about, so let's get you in on this. Let's hear what you have to say about all the stuff that Travis just went over.
Yeah, I appreciate that, considering this is probably going to be a long episode. So here we go. In responding to China, I largely agree with what he said. I want to kind of like highlight and frame it for not only you guys but for the audience in the regards that a lot of things here in the United States were twofold. when it came to China. Number one is that there was an assumption from both what we would call neolibs and neocons that as China economically developed, they were going to become more democratic. And all the way up until about 2011, that was largely the case. Now under Xi Jinping, that has gone into drastic reverse. But
Facts.
as much as I want to just openly be like bad Xi, there's also a level where what a lot of people don't realize, and we've seen this through the developing world writ large, is that the internet and big data have been the biggest anti-democratic system we have ever seen in world history.
Facts,
Because literally all you have to do as a state-sponsored or as a state entity in the state intelligence service is that if you don't have right to privacy, if you don't have right to freedom of speech and all these things that, kind of come with being a more Western nation, quote unquote, then what's to stop the government from being like, oh, hey, Tom, Dick, and Harry are going to get together on Thursday to, have a conversation about how much they hate the government. Why don't we go pay them a beating? Yeah. And that's what happens. And that is literally what we saw, is that when literally, in a way, China's economic prosperity has become their downfall, and that, many people who live in a Chinese city now have a cell phone, but that means that the Chinese intelligence services, particularly the domestic services, can literally just kind of show up and tell you that we don't like what you're doing and we will make you disappear.
Happened in Hong Kong. Great point.
Yep.
Yes. So that was really concerning. And then, of course, don't get me wrong, I'm not a leftist. I'm actually on the right. But there's a level where there was a lot of corporate interest regarding China, because it's very simple in regards that there has been an estimated about $4 trillion that has come out from the United States alone that went into China between about 1990 and 2010. That was pure investment that largely supercharged their growth, and people want a return on their investments, and they were getting one. So whether you were Apple, Nike, what have you, you were making, cheap goods in China, shipping them across the Pacific and selling them here in the United States, and a lot of people don't want to, cash out on their investment. I think a lot of companies have woken up to that reality, but that was a long time coming, and as long as that, that cha-ching was definitely on the table, there was going to be a lot of resistance. And as an example of that, while I'm not a sports fan, I hear the NBA got in a lot of trouble a couple years ago.
Yep.
So, I want to talk a little bit more about the Chinese economy real quick, and a little bit about their statistics, because I'm always questionable of Chinese statistics, particularly in the fact that every time that they come out with new data, it's not coherent with the stuff they had before. And I gotta be honest with here, and it's not that I don't expect the Chinese can do math, but what the issue here is that we are dealing with a police state that will openly dissuade information that is contrary to the narrative of the party. 100%. And what's concerning is that there is information that they will either let out or somehow gets out. That is very concerning. I'll get to that here in a moment. Their numbers are questionable, and to kind of emphasize that is the last Chinese census, the one that they did in 2020, they do theirs at the same time we do, is their preliminary results came out. And what they openly kind of admitted was that they may have overcounted their population by literally 100 million.
Wow.
If those are claims are to be true, and to tell you that these claims are not just, something that is ridiculous, for the last 15 years, there have been people within China who are talking about just like how they administrate their schools, right? And we get to see their student, basically their student logs and their student rollouts, to where we know how many people are actually in their schools. And what has been consistently shown, and it was largely assumed to be a matter of corruption, is that for each student you have, you're going to be paid, to teach those kids. So, you
so
get
they got
funded.
room to fudge the quotas.
Yeah. So the assumption was that it was rife political corruption, to where school administrators and school districts were openly telling the Chinese government that they were having more students than they actually had. Yep. But when it came down to it, is that it appears that whether that was the case or not, the Chinese statistics between what their population is supposed to be versus how many children they had, this is particularly anyone who's younger than me, weren't lining up by a factor of about 10%. So, just simply putting it out there, this has been in the weeds for a while, and it looks like the Chinese may be openly honest, and that the 2020 census numbers that are now coming out, if they are even remotely real, is that India actually became the most populous nation probably in 2013.
Wow.
Yeah, and you're right. I guarantee you, you're 100% right because that. So the Chinese government has a quota system for everything. So just like you said, it opens and leaves ripe for corruption. Well, one thing that you could actually find clips on that happens is so in cities where there are controlled COVID lockdowns, testing is mandatory. So anywhere you go, somewhere you have mandatory acid trace testing. Um, and you can literally find videos of because the people that work behind the testing counters, they actually have quotas for how many tests that they're supposed to carry out in the day. So you'll actually see people just sitting there, they take a COVID test, they open it, they'll lick it or shoot the test, put it back, seal it, and throw it in the pot and count. And that is a constant because they have a quota to meet. So you're 100%. So I would not be surprised at all if they were fudging the numbers because that's a hallmark of the system because they have a quota system. It's you're both judged, paid, and held accountable for it. And you know when you got a cushy job at the CCP, you really don't want to deal with accountability. So if you can fudge the numbers to get by, you're going to do it.
And it makes total sense. Go ahead.
I want to circle back into the economy real quick because that's the one major note that I still want to hit outside of the relationship with Russia. Is that when it comes to what the Chinese numbers are, is that I don't think a lot of people really understand where China is. We have this perception that they are the workshop of the world, that they have rapidly developed and rapidly industrialized to a degree where, you know, they're doing great. And if you look at cities like Shanghai, you would get that general impression. But the reality here is that this is a country that still has the average, this is a country that still has an average income of 1/6 the Americans. And yet also we talk about wealth income distribution here in the United States like it's a big issue. Forget it. It's horrific for China because not only
for
do you
them
have
being
like,
socialist. Go ahead. Sorry.
Like I won't go there, but what I'll put it here is this: you have a political and economic aristocracy within China. It's very, very normal for not only China but for most of the world. And when it comes down to it, these are people that are incredibly rich, incredibly powerful. And you know, it's just basically kleptocracy as we know it. But not only that, is that the exterior of the country, and I'll just put it that as like the port cities and the more I'll put it in this regard, the more coastal areas and the area that is the Chinese Triangle, as an example, which is this area that starts with around Beijing, goes to Shanghai, and then goes into the interior along it's the Central River. I can't remember what that one's called, but there's a triangle there that has the better part of about 60% of the Chinese population. Everything that's in that triangle and on the coast is largely either been integrated with infrastructure or has been developed to where they have a decent standard of living. Most of these folks will have a cell phone. Most of these folks will, you know, be able to participate in what we call modern life. But outside of that, if you're in the interior, if you're in Yunnan or a lot of these other places that I can't speak of, but Xizang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, some of these more, I guess you could say like frontier provinces, you are as poor as the average Indian citizen. There is no industrialization for you. It is almost like a two different worlds here. And it's far more severe than, as an example, going from like New York City to like Yakima, Washington, right? Just somewhere that's in the middle of nowhere, is that you still see modern vestiges of life, like the interstate and what have you. You don't see that in China in these particular areas. So,
I just is by design.
I can't speak to that because I know there's political interests and economic interests involved with that. But what I wanted to just kind of wrap up with is that China isn't something in the regards that I definitely would say people need to be concerned with, particularly in their economy. But I would say that with everything that I have seen, I would not trust the growth number at being 3%. I strongly would suggest that absolutely within this year, China has probably slid into recession. I'm not going to say it's a major one, but if you look at where all the economic activity is, particularly this year, those are the places that have been openly shut down across the board. So if anyone tells me that the Chinese economy is growing, we saw back in 2020, the only way they maintained their economic growth, and that was by their own numbers, was inventory growth. They kept building, but they literally stuck it in a warehouse. And while they've been able to sell some of those products as trade has reopened, is that has absolutely slowed down into the modern day. I've got real reservations here between something that we haven't talked about with the bank runs that was going on there for a quick minute, that the Chinese economy is probably hemorrhaging and seizing up. The question is, and there's we can kind of move this into the final section of this show, is a lot of people were actually saying, hey, is that long forecasted end of China to where basically the rubber meets the road and everything starts to break down a reality? And while I wouldn't proclaim, expect the Chinese to openly implode tomorrow, what the real instance is that this is a throughput economic system. It is literally held up by zero interest loans provided by the 4 central banks, to where as long as you can guarantee somebody a job, you can get a loan. And as long as you can keep people employed, you can get a loan. But what we've seen as a priority of this is, or an outcome of this, pardon me, is that overall, you have had entire building districts within China literally be built up to maintain employment, and then literally at the moment that they're done, an entire Chinese or destruction team will come in, destroy the buildings, and they'll rebuild them again. I have a lot of woes when it comes to the Chinese economic system, in that the rubber might be coming off in the regards that we may see a China that is actually shrinking and having significant issues going forward instead of increasing. And the question is, number one, will the Chinese admit it? And number two, if that's true, this is the scarier part, how will they respond?
Yeah, before Travis, before you jump in on this topic, I just want to put a marker in this, because we will be splitting this episode into 2 parts. So I got the marker in. So Travis, please, I know that you've been dying to talk about the internal Chinese economy and the bank runs that are happening and the kind of protest and smattering of tanks showing up in random places. Like, Travis, get into that. Like, I want to know about that.
Yeah. So first I'll elaborate on what I mean by first of all, everything you said within the economy is 100% spot on. Now, the reason why I said in terms of what there's the disparity between living in a tier 1 and tier 2 city and living out in the countryside, and what I meant by a lot of that is by design. It's because the way China works is when you're born there, you have what's called a human code or a WHO code. And that basically dictates where you're allowed to live. So the idea of social mobility doesn't exist if you are someone who isn't born within a specific district or region in China. If you're born in the countryside, you basically, so you can move to Shanghai if you want, but all of the assistance and subsidies that you would normally get as someone born in that city with the correct WHO code will not apply to you. And there's even cases where this is exploited to an extent. So some awesome people that I follow who they do podcasts. There's a small subculture called the Shamata, and they're basically these people who live on the countryside, and they move into the cities to do work to send money back home because it's extremely poor. But they essentially are paid in like slave wages and all of that because of the fact that they don't have the necessary human code that requires that they make a certain wage, that they have a certain income, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, going back to what he was talking about the sort of sham economic output that China's been putting up these last several years, he's 100% spot on. So first, let's start with what constitutes most of China's GDP when it turns into growth. 30% of China's GDP, 30% is made up in real estate and property. So that's been the major component whenever China's talking about building. That's why he's 100% spot on. He says a lot of how they're able to make these numbers and put people to work and sort of give the illusion of economic activity is by throwing it all in property. So that is why for the longest time, China's had this system where it just gives zero-interest loans, hands and fists, to these property developers like Evergrande and others to sort of just do nothing but build property, whether there's a need for them or not. It was just sort of, hey, are people actually going to move out here if we build an entire city here? Don't worry about it. Just build it. They'll build it. Nobody moves in. Nobody is interested in the houses. They turn into a ghost city, and maybe a year or two later, they get demolished and the cycle repeats itself. Now, that's pretty much development on a commercial side. But let's talk about the residential side because that dovetails into the banking crisis. So in China, the primary way you go about buying property is through pre-sales. Here in America, we shop around for houses on Zillow and Redfin or whatever. You see a house, you look at it. If you like it, you put a price down. That's not how it works in China. In China, you go to a freaking seminar, you'll see a schematic blueprint, or if you're lucky, a nice little diagram of some property. You put money down, you make your purchase, and you actually begin paying your mortgage. And the expectation is from 1 to 2 years tops, your property will be done. You move in, and then you continue paying your mortgage. These last several years, that hasn't been the case because greed comes in. So as you know, like I said, 30% of the economy consists of property. So the message that these property developers get is just build, 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 and we'll just get rich, rich, rich. So they'll take the escrows that they are paid by a Chinese buyer for the property that they intend to buy, and they'll use that for new projects. And those new projects would still be leveraged by the banks. Well, after COVID hit, and because of several other economic downturns and the foreign investment drying up because of the pandemic, they started running out of capital. So not only were they not able to complete their future projects, but they're not able to meet the obligations of the property that was promised from people paid in cash via escrow. So what that has essentially done is that's angered hundreds of millions of Chinese buyers. And so what has happened is that's created I mentioned the Tongping, the lay flat, and now we're in the Bailan stage of protest. Bailan in Chinese means let it rot. So essentially what Chinese people have decided is it's been 4 years, I've been paying my mortgage, and I still don't have a home. And not only that, because the property developers are running out of cash and need to make money, they've begun discounting new property. So imagine you buy a condo and then you find out that somebody bought a condo in the same area, same layout, same build as you, and it costs 20% less. You'd be ticked, right? So as a result, people in about 100 cities in China right now are basically protesting by not paying their mortgages. And this is essentially bringing the Chinese property and banking sector to its knees.
Before you continue on, though, real quick, do you know how long it usually takes a Chinese developer to finish a property for a person? Because you said that they've been going 4 years. In the United States, it can take anywhere between 8 months to 18 months for a house to be built or whatever, right?
Yep.
Is that the similar time frame in China we're looking at? Or?
Yeah. So originally that was the time frame that most people would expect to have their house completed by. Now it's like 4 years if you're lucky, but
right.
They haven't been getting an answer, and because they've run out of money, they're not able to pay builders. So, most Chinese people just look at, a empty shells of high rises and condos with nobody working on them. And another thing is Chinese regulation and building standards they have no standards. They just don't. So if nobody's touching your building or regularly checking it, it just rots. So tofu dredge is a huge, huge problem. It's been a problem for decades, and that's the case. So, you just look at that and you just see your investor dropping. And not only that, the average Chinese person truly can't afford most housing at the prices that they sell at. I mean, we're talking 6, 10, 20x your normal income. They're having to basically chip in with their entire family, take out loans and whatever to make these purchases. And they basically put their whole life into that, and then it doesn't happen. So yeah, it's bad. Going back into the banking crisis, again, that deals with greed and corruption. So again, 30% goes to property. So if you're an investment bank, or if you're a bank, what you do is you'll tie up the deposits that people make at your banks, and you use those deposits for the property sector. But they're not telling the Chinese people this. Instead, they're saying, hey, we have this savings account that you can set up at our bank, and it gives you 10% interest. You're a regular Chinese person, you're thinking, oh, it's just a savings account and I get 10% interest. That's great. What they're not telling them is that it's not a savings bank and it's not guaranteed or protected by anything. It's an investment account. And that's what caused the Hainan banking crisis that occurred several months ago. They essentially ran out of liquidity and collateral, so they could not honor withdrawals. So what they were doing was freezing withdrawals at three major banks in this region, and that's what caused that initial protest that we saw in the bank runs. And yeah,
That's heavy, man. The so what you're essentially saying is that what kind of precipitated the Great Recession, the housing market crash in the United States, is on hyperdrive in China right now. Is that would be a good
yeah,
analogy?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
This is why, sort of dovetailing into our whole projection about like why I'm saying, this real estate here is gonna, get interesting. And I'll just leave it at that, because a large amount of property here in America is foreign investment. A lot of that foreign investment is Chinese. And the reason for that is in China, you cannot own property. Essentially, what you're doing is you're leasing property for up to 75 years in China. That's basically how things work. So if you want real estate in terms of an asset, you have to buy it somewhere else. Now, my thing is companies like Evergrande are basically out of money, and China's not willing to bail them out. So they have to get the capital somewhere. So at some point, I would estimate that they're going to have to liquidate some of those foreign assets that they have in the United States and elsewhere. What effect that will have on our economy and everywhere else, that's anyone's guess. But just know that out of the five, that there are five major property develop institutions, and they are all currently in default. Now, what brought about that whole crisis is uh, China reacting late, the Chinese government reacting late to this. They set up a policy called the three red line policy, which basically is like once you cross this line, you're only allowed to get this much credit. Then once you cross this line, you'll only get like less credit. And then once you cross the third line, you don't get anything. Well, Evergrande, the day they set the three red line policy in place, Evergrande was like, well, we already hit line three. What are we going to do? The other bank, the other property developers, they at line one, line two, but Evergrande was already way above beyond the third red line. That's why the Evergrande crisis that made news here, that's why that happened months ago, as opposed to all of the other property developers going in default now. Because Evergrande just happened to be the biggest.
Wow. Wow. Sorry, I had to deal with a chatter. Tiberius,
no worries.
give me your thoughts about that.
Have a little bit, but not a lot for you on this one. There's a level where like I hear stories, but I'm just not an expert in basically domestic Chinese property rights and consumption patterns. I just kind of look at it from a macro situation in regards to, I'll pull up Moody's every now and again and just kind of like see what's going on. And I'll put it this way. Basically, since about 2014, Moody's has estimated that about 30% of all the economic activity within China may actually be what we would call legalized loan sharking. That is just, oh my God. Like, all I'll just say is, oh my God, right? So
you're right. they are right.
Okay. If that's actually the case, like this is a system that if it actually like loses its footing, you are looking at the most catastrophic economic collapse humanity has ever seen. And that's why I'm like, hey, if it ever comes to that point where China economically slips up to where you have bank runs, to where you have entire massive Chinese corporations just literally kicking the bucket, it will literally be one of those days to where we watch China that is growing or stable or what have you, to people are having runs to get food.
Yep.
I know that's a big take, and I know I like to meme when it comes on the show, but as you can tell, I'm a lot more, a lot more grounded on this episode. That is the big concern when it comes to China, and it always has been. That's why everyone's been predicting, or not everyone, but most people have been predicting the eventual downfall, is that this is a system that has the Japanese throughput system that we saw in the 80s where people spend, and they just load up the system, but eventually it will, through one reason or another, break. The remarkable thing about the Chinese is that they have absolutely pushed this beyond limits that anyone thought was possible. The question is, will time eventually catch up with them? I absolutely do believe that it will. But when that is, I have no idea, because I would have called it a couple years ago. But more particularly, I thought it was going to be this year, because largely of Evergrande, and then you had the bank runs where I get that it's a limited thing, and a lot of this was leaks. But when you literally see Chinese tanks in the streets protecting banks, that was a big sign for me that the floor might have been coming out. Looks like right now they've been able to reestablish order. I don't know how they've done that, but if it's getting that bad, if they're having the lockdowns in combination with bank runs, in addition with deploying tanks into the streets, I would say we're probably getting pretty close. And if that is the case, then we're going to have a real conversation, not on how to handle China as a growing power that is reaching its influence into the wider world, which I do want to talk about the SCO as we, that's our final topic.
Sure.
But particularly in the idea that what if the actual reality is that we are trying to see, or we're looking at China looking more like it's more, I'll put it this way, sad parts of its history, to where China is devolving into like a warlordship, to where
you have the Great Restoration.
Yeah, you like, that's what I'm far more concerned with, is that I always thought that we were going to get here. I just didn't know when, but I really can see this, and I'm willing to make this conversation, or this point right now. I don't know if this is the last year of China, but I think this is the last decade that we see China as a growing power. I'm willing to make that claim.
I mean, with demographics being the way that they are.
Demographics, I'll put it this way. Three major crises that I'll throw right off the bat. Number one is demographics. If China's going to have a consumption base, they don't have it, because everyone who is of a healthy Chinese demography is my age or older, because of one child. After which, we've seen their numbers, especially if the newer numbers are even more true, is that China gutted its population in half for people who are younger than me. That is a huge thing that they're going to have to deal with, because you don't really have a consumption-based economy with people who are, 40. Does that mean that they can't export it? That's been the entire purpose of One Belt One Road, is that they want to take the 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds that they're going to have and basically turn themselves in the Asian Germany. They're going to produce a crap ton of goods at mid-skilled labor. They're going to be able to maintain their I'll say it this way, their trade and their economic portfolio and their wealth, because you're going to have these people that are highly skilled, highly technical, or experienced. They're going to be able to export to, at minimum, the wider distribution of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia that is developing and building out all of these economic programs that they want to do, or they're going to try to export to whoever else will take it. I think you can pretty much write the Americans off. I really don't expect that relationship going forward, especially in the consideration that sooner or later there's going to be another Republican in charge. I don't know when that's going to be. But I will put it this way: if the Biden administration doesn't end that relationship, whoever replaces him probably will. So the United States is out. South Asia is a mess, to say the least, and I'm really interested to see if that catches on fire at the end of the year. And then it comes down to sub-Saharan Africa. Remind you that while they are putting massive amounts of investment into sub-Saharan Africa, you're talking about places that are poorer than India on average. And they've basically loan sharked them by saying, hey, we'll give you this wonderful airport. We'll even fund it for you. Just make sure you pay us back. Oh, you didn't pay us back? Okay, now we own it for 99 years.
Yep.
Economic hitman literally is being done.
Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Sri Lanka.
So that's the geopolitical affairs is kind of where I want to go last, if you guys want to go that route. But the long and the short here is that China very much concerns me in not being a belligerent state that openly is trying to assert a growing dominance in the world. I actually see it as very more likely that China is a reactionary state that is trying to keep the lights on, or are they going to go out with a bang? Which puts Taiwan on the table, and it puts the stands on the table, and when it comes to the Russians, which we'll get here, it put what we call Outer Manchuria on the table, and I will close out that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So before we go on, or actually while we'll go on, say this is a good segue, is that what you're saying, Tiberius, about this being a reactionary nation in decline, trying to maintain its current prominence in the world? I think that's very much true. And the reason I say that is because for ever since Xi Jinping took power, there has been a push to grow nationalism within China, and nationalism only really works if the nation is doing well. And if there's any sort of either internal or external breakdown of it doing well, nationalism comes back to bite you in the ass, and that's kind of what we're seeing now. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I want to make a comment to that, because I think this is a double-edged sword kind of thing that I want to hit. Is that nationalism is good for, if you will, patriotism when things are going well. Nationalism is far better for what we would call like revanchism, I think is the technical term for this. But that's openly being like, hey, look, we got screwed by these people, and we got screwed by these people. Let's go kick them in the teeth. That usually associated with the political right in the West, but that is absolutely the direction that I think China is going, and I think that's actually what the nationalism is geared out for, is that if China faces a reality to where they're doing well, the nationalism keeps everybody happy. If China is seeing a reality to where they're not doing well, that nationalism is a political unifier to make sure that, hey, I'm Han Chinese and I hate everybody else. We need to go smack the Taiwanese. We need to go stab the Japanese. Those damn Americans, we'll fight them too. That's where I'm seriously concerned, is that China may end up being the most xenophobic, hyper nationalist country coming into the next decade.
Okay, so you're right. Travis was about to say, were you about to say the same thing?
Yeah, I was saying, you hit the nail on the head on the nationalism part, because it is real. Like, there's a reason why expats are fleeing in droves, because the xenophobia is basically, it's just right there. If you live there now, it's just assumed that if you're not Han Chinese, you have COVID. That's basically that's like, I know that sounds hilarious, but that's literally the case. That's literally the case right now. And in terms of like even how they view their own people, like Uyghurs, they're just seen as others. If you're from Inner Mongolia, you're just seen as an other. To them, unless you're Han Chinese, unless you speak Mandarin, even though in a country where there's 20, if not more, dialects spoken, if you don't speak Mandarin, you're not true Chinese. Like that's just how they treat things over there now under the current environment with nationalism. And then there's also the fact that because you mentioned the word revanchism. Well, that's what's been going on for decades. That's why the average person our age has not heard of Tiananmen Square. That's why most people who grow up in mainland China believe that it was the CCP that kicked Japan out of mainland China, even though it was the Chinese Nationalist Party that did that. Fun fact, there's a famous quote from Mao Zedong that actually thanks Japan for invading, because for a while, the CCP were never a threat to the Chinese Nationalist Party at the time, the Kuomintang. It wasn't until they spent years during World War II fighting against the Japanese and were sufficiently depleted that they were able to be defeated by the CCP in the first place. So,
yeah, I agree with Tiberius, and what I meant by coming to bite you in the ass is pretty much everything that Travis just said. And by that, I mean China is actually multi-ethnic. People might not realize that, but it's not just Han Chinese everywhere, although they're dominant ethnic group within China. There's also the Uyghurs, is it Miyu? How do you pronounce the other?
Uzbeks.
I was talking about the other Muslim group. It's
the Uyghurs.
Uzbeks.
No,
it's Uyghurs.
Uzbeks. Okay, that's who it is. Okay.
Yeah, there's Uyghurs, Uzbeks, Turks,
Turks.
Tajiks.
And then because of their growing imperialism, because that's what they did when they took over Tibet and when they took over some other areas, they have other ethnic groups there as well. And so everything's going well, everybody can get along. As soon as things go south, well, no, it's your fault. Or now it's your fault, right? And so they start to cannibalize their own internal government structures and their own internal body politic, because they have to blame somebody. And it's not always going to be able to be blamed on an outside force, especially if that saber rattling is seen by your internal group of people as nothing, as feckless, which is what some of the people in China did when the Chinese government did their exercises in around Taiwan, because they're like
slapping themselves on Douyin.
So they were like, there was people on Weibo basically saying, why don't you just go in and bomb them and take them back over? What are you, weak? And it's the same kind of thing that's just going to perpetuate the cycle of, like, I don't know, decay, essentially, within the Chinese government party system. But that brings up the SCO and how the SCO ends up kind of melding this, nascent, I guess it's not nascent anymore, it's rising nationalist movement within China, and its ability to project force outside of its borders in kind of like a multilateral sense. And Tiberius, you wanted to talk about that. Travis, do you have a thought you want to pick up with on first, or?
So the SEO, in my opinion, I feel like it's a reaction to the declining purpose of BRICS. So because the SEO was more so along the line supposed to do what BRICS was proposed to do, which was to create a new hegemony that would replace the Western hegemony, the so-called world order that was established.
Yeah, 1 second. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, for people that don't know.
And South Africa.
And South Africa. Yeah, that's the S in there. That South Africa was added at fairly, not recently, but it was one of the last countries. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now now
go ahead.
And this is a good topic to point out why the SEO exists in the first place. Because the problem with BRICS is all 5 members used to be on the same page, but now they're not anymore. It's particularly India and China. So when it comes to BRICS, the R in BRICS, Russia is now a global pariah.
I mean, so also Russia's Xi Jinping's bitch now, so.
yes, basically. So because of that being a global pariah, they're now more reliant on China, and their whole thing is, trying to insulate themselves from the West. And the whole insulate themselves from the West runs counter to Chinese and India's interests. Then you have India. India basically wants to be the neutral guy in the middle that wants to basically have their cake and eat it too and lean on both sides. That's why India is a member of BRICS, but at the same time, they're also a member of the Quad. So India has a close relationship with Russia because of their historic bond. The Soviet Union was the only country to assist India during their war for independence. China, on the other hand, wants full control of BRICS, which runs counter to what India and China want. So China was proposing that they allow several more countries, specifically Iran and one other whose name escapes me, into BRICS, but India vetoed it. Because the thing with the BRICS agreement is every member of BRICS has veto power. And India pretty much said no to the whole BRICS plus proposal by China, because they're like, no, because this only really benefits you. This doesn't really help me. This doesn't really help my influence. This doesn't really make me richer. It just gives more leverage to you, because for some particular reason, every member that you want to admit into BRICS is also part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So obviously, when it comes to us voting on matters of importance, everybody who's on the Belt and Road Initiative is immediately going to side with you on anything. No, I don't think so. So the SCO, in my opinion, is China's sort of solution in response to that.
Based Modi, by the way.
Yeah.
But Tiberius, go ahead, man.
Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach with this. I agree with like 90% of what he said, or 95. So like, I'm not going to hang up on the 5. What I'm looking at here is the better part of particularly like 2008 and later. is that the three major Asian powers, and we're going to say this is Russia as a kind of a pejorative Asian power, China and India, have largely been trying to balance out each other's interests because of they recognize a level of, I'll call it this, mutual interest in that.
Yeah.
For one reason or another, they don't want to deal with the West on the West's terms. Now, I say they do this at their peril because the West is freaking awesome. Go team. But when it comes down to it, is that they do have separate interests. And this is where it all gets really mushy. China has very stinging relationships with the other two. Whether it be their historical issues or whether it just be their modern geopolitical issues, is that this is thorny for them. The Russians and the Indians kind of make natural allies, and so as long as there's not like a massive problem that they have to deal with that's largely within the stands, India and Russia don't really care, and they can mutually cooperate. So that's been usually a very positive relationship. So let me outline this, starting with India, and I'll kind of go through. India has flirted with the idea of kind of developing a more Western model, but there is a cultural systemic issue, if you want to put it in that regard, that they just generally hate the West because of Britain. Now, honestly, I am going to be a jerk and openly say that Britain was one of the best things that ever happened to India. If it wasn't for Britain, India would not be a unified state. That India would literally just be a situation of warlords that would be tearing each other apart. And whether I'll absolutely take it. I'll absolutely take it. Look, Britain may have done some bad things to India. Britain also did a lot of good for India, and if it wasn't for the British, India would be in a far worse situation than it is already. So
I don't like to play that game. I don't think that's true. But
we can talk about that.
I'll say that you can say that Britain united India in that they're all like, we all need to unite because that's the only way we're going to freaking take the Brits out of the country. So there's kind of that. As far as the whole unification part, I mean, they did kind of split India and Pakistan into two separate states who have been at war with each other forever. So there's
that is entirely a domestic issue. That was literally the Muslim League said, screw that, we are not going to be part of a unified India. I can't remember the name of the Pakistan's first president, but he was vehemently opposed.
Complicated. That issue is very complicated and goes back prior to the British Raj. But I don't want to give you this. Go ahead.
I know not to make this an India episode, but I'll just simply suffice it to this: India's biggest thing that actually shows the issue that there are is that they have more dialects and more ethnicities than China does. They even have more than Europe does. The primary thing that unites them, as particularly their leadership to where they can interact with each other, is that they speak English. And that is the pejorative holdover of the British in regards to where that is how they usually communicate. If we want to go to do that, we'll do the India episode. Okay,
we'll have to do the India episode because that's some things I want to argue with you about. Let's not get too far off track.
So India's got like a trauma that they don't want to deal with the West, but they don't really want to interact with China because while they don't have like a historical problem, remind you the Himalayas keeps that from really being an issue.
Do. They've been.
I'll get to that in a second. When Tibet got taken over in 1950, is that the relationship with China completely melted. There was a period of a couple of wars, but one of them was an absolute blowout on the favor of the Chinese, to where India was goaded into a war. China absolutely blew the floor out for India, and they've maintained a really bad relationship since because China has openly used Pakistan as a wedge. And so that's a huge issue within that. And so India doesn't trust the Chinese. They don't trust the West. And the only people they have a good relationship with, I would say in the globe, is Russia. We'll get there. Yeah. So we'll get there.
Like I said,
getting back to China is that China is looking at themselves as, I'll put it this way. The word for China in the Chinese language is Zhongguo. That translates back to us as the Middle Kingdom, but if you want to take it in a more like metaphorical sense, it means center of the world. They believe themselves to be like the Garden of Eden in the regards that they are the center of civilization, they are the center of the world, because they didn't have to interact with anybody that was a quote unquote like pair or equal until the Europeans showed up and kicked them in the teeth. And so you had the whole century of humiliation, and where China has had to have I'll say this: China has had to have a lot of soul searching in the last century in regards to their role in the world, because on one level they still have a 5,000 year long history of being the center of the world that is still ingrained within their society. But on the other side of that is that they now realize that whether it is Japan, whether it is India, whether it is the Europeans, they do not, they are not the only players in the game. Particularly now with dealing with the Americans, that's a serious, like, I'll put it this way: it's a serious worldview issue that they're dealing with, and so dealing with others has been really finicky for them, and they don't really like dealing with anybody if they can help it. Which brings us into the Russians. The Russians obviously are a European power, but they have propagated power into Asia. And where the Chinese relationship with the Russians is that they recognize that they can work together on a lot of things, but they have vehement disagreements. Number one, if you're looking at the positive side, the Russians literally say, hey, look, we'll look west. Handling Ukraine, handling NATO, handling what is within Europe, we will take that responsibility. That is our domain. China, you don't have to deal with it. You can't even touch it. On the other side, we can't force project into the Pacific. We would love to, but literally the only place, and I'll get to the bad side here in a second, the only place that we can force project power of is the places that we took from you. So it's one of those deals to where the Russians have largely conceded ground and the Chinese have largely conceded ground that Russia can handle Europe, China can handle the Pacific, and they can make a lot of mutual strategic advantages to playing that field. The issue is because the Soviet Union took a crap and Russia has a long history with the Chinese not getting along, is that there's two major negatives here. One's the stands. China or Russia does not want to see the other one have a firm position in the stands because it is geopolitically really important, particularly Kazakhstan. Not only is it the energy reserves, but it's also if anyone controls the access to airspace in that area, you can forward project into literally from the southern front, bombing the living crap out of most of Russia, and from the from their western front is that Kazakhstan is a great forward position to get at the most inhospitable places of China that China has a really hard trouble policing. So anything that happens in that region, if it gets out of hand, the Russians and the Chinese basically get at each other's throats. Yep. The other part is what I alluded to earlier, which is Outer Manchuria. This was a region that was taken by the Chinese in 1860 from the Russians. And this allows the Russians to forward project at all into the Pacific because it's the only warm water port in all of Russia, ironically enough, is on the Pacific. It takes the Trans-Siberian Railway of 6,000 miles from Moscow to Vladivostok just to supply this thing. And it's where the entire Pacific Fleet is based out of. This was taken from the Chinese, and there is somewhere in the order to 2 to 3 million Chinese that are on the Russian side of the border that China really would like to have back. In the event that that would happen, Russia is permanently knocked out of the Pacific theater, which leaves China and Japan to be the only players in that region. If I were Russia, I'd just concede it and move and work on Europe, but the Russians will never do that because they're too proud. So I think I've outlined that pretty well. I'm sorry that I got very winded, but yeah.
No, I think that's fair.
Well said. Well said. Well said.
Travis, you want to pick up on anything that he put down?
So a couple of things regarding what you're mentioning with the sort of politicking between India and China. That's also a new source of consternation is basically how India's regard to its neighbors in Nepal and Sri Lanka. Because you're right. The thing that brought India and China into conflict was their incursion through Tibet. But India is also looking at that and seeing that this is a growing concern because of the deep amount of investment and influence that they now have in Nepal, as well as the abundance of influence that they have in Sri Lanka. This is why India has sort of been rethinking its position in terms of economic aid towards the two countries. As we know, Sri Lanka is completely bankrupted as a country, which actually is beginning to become a recurring theme with countries that are members of the Belt and Road Initiative. But anyway, Sri Lanka is bankrupt. They went through a completely political upheaval. Their outgoing Prime Minister, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, fled. I think he's still trying to get back into the country, but they do not want him back in power. They have a new prime minister. They're a complete mess now. But India has basically stepped up its aid to basically try to increase and grow its relations with Sri Lanka to try and get it to come out from under China. Nepal is teetering on that point, getting close to where Sri Lanka is now. However, China is willing to allow them to renegotiate their loans and restructure their payments or whatever. But I believe they're running out of appetite for that because of what's happening to them domestically. But be that as it may, that's the situation where it is in Nepal. Nepal is actually one of India's oldest allies from a historic standpoint. So that's one of the reasons why India is now trying to sort of step up its aid and diplomacy to help Nepal out. And expect to see that, and expect to see India trying to grow its influence with its more cultural neighbors in and around its borders, places like Nepal, places like Sri Lanka, places like Bangladesh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because its fear is that, just like you said, when you fall behind on your payments, they own your ports, they own your country, basically. If China does that to enough countries that surround India, they basically have boxed them into a corner politically.
Yeah, 100% true.
The only addendum I want to put to this is that there is a reality to that, to if you want to call this blatant economic coercion or economic annexation, which is a word that people have been throwing around. I think there's a level where that's true, and there's definitely a political, I'll put it this, there's a political arm or a political string that the Chinese can definitely pull on. But one of the things that really concerns me is how openly people kind of reject the idea that in basically a strategic or a national interest, these countries can literally just turn the table on the Chinese and say, nah, you know what, screw our relationship with the Chinese, we're nationalizing this particular industry.
So Ethiopia did.
Yes.
Yep.
And that's one of the things where, like, a lot of people talk about, oh, hey, if the Chinese are going to force us, then they're just going to have to follow suit. But I think far more the reality here, and China's actually getting a little bit of a feel for this on a number of African nations, is that if China pushes people too far, they literally will just say, you know what, screw it. We don't care if we have to sink our relationship with you. We'll literally just nationalize the thing and call it our own.
Yeah. And it's not like, just to pick up on that just a little bit, it's like, it's not like they don't have other people they can go to get help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
China's not the only game in town. There's everybody else. So go ahead.
And Europe is starting to respond to China's Belt and Road Initiative. I think it's woefully inadequate, their proposals that are doing right now, but it's essentially the same thing of not going through IMF, but they have this whole, I think it's like 300 billion or something like that to try and invest in these countries. I'm like, the Belt and Road Initiative alone is something like 6 trillion. You're going to need to put up more than that, but yeah. Yep.
I got to remember what it's called, but it largely has been in the works literally since the late Obama administration, and it's been supercharged, particularly by the Biden administration. It's not the IMF, but it is a integrated loaning system for economic development, but it's not particularly just economic development, it's particularly infrastructure. So if you're trying to build road, if you're trying to build rail, if you're trying to build power distributions, the things that actually kind of bring you into a quote unquote a more modern developed society, is that Europeans and particularly the Americans have kind of gotten together on this and said, look, we're putting up something on the order of like $300 billion for any nation that wants to apply for these loans to actually get themselves off the ground as a thing to compete with China. I'm not going to say that is an open win straight out of the gate, because there is issues with how that's administered, and more particularly, there is the issue that when we offer these loans, we ask, is this going to be profitable, or are you just going to sink a bunch of money into it to where...
And you can't think of it like that.
Yeah,
you can't think of it like that. You have to expect that it will take decades, if not longer, for countries to even begin to make good on these. You have to not think about the profit. And I don't know if they can look at it that way, to be honest, but hopefully.
I get where you're going with that. It's not necessarily just the profit that I was really concerned with, because while the West actually has a far more profit-based model when it comes to loans, the real issue is that there is a lot of countries that are these loan programs are going to be open to that have a horrific problem with kleptocracy. in regards to where
That's true.
we develop we develop a loan program.
Afghanistan.
Yeah, we develop we have this loan that we gave you to build this road. Where's the road? Why do you only have 1 mile of paved road here? And they're like, oh well, we spent it all. What'd you spend it all? And then somebody looks through the books, and it's literally just corruption after corruption. I don't
Yep.
I don't want to punch on poor countries and just be like poor countries bad, but there is a problem to where a lot of the people that the West would love to invest in do not have the civic traditions of being transparent, to being, if you will, quote unquote, somewhat liberal, and particularly, being kind of honest actors. So yeah, there is a level where the West is going to have, if you will, a far higher standard of threshold into saying, yes, we want to invest in you. Yes, we will put our work and our effort into you. Where the Chinese will just say, screw it, and they will just dump a crap ton of money into you. One of the things
yeah.
Go ahead. I'll just make this as my final note.
Just put a pinpoint on that just real quick. With the expectation that if they don't follow through, then we get everything to go.
We take your airports, we take your airport.
Go on.
And the good news is that a lot of these nations are really waking up to that idea, particularly in the last 2 years. So I'm very thankful for that. One of the ideas that has been thrown out to me is that the State Department has actually got a quote unquote secret plan that is basically summarizes this. Let the Chinese take the first step. Let the Chinese put a bunch of assets into these states. No, I'm serious. This is literally what I've been told.
That's why I'm laughing.
That's actually...
Yeah, let the Chinese take the first step. Let the Chinese openly let the Chinese openly do some of the heavy lifting, and in the event that they basically destroy the relationship or that something looks promising, have this development forum come in.
You go, hey.
It's like, hey, look, nationalize it or sell it to us, that kind of thing, to where it's like, look, we'll keep you on board in the regard that you can play by our rules. And if you want to go with, our team, we have the loans for you. We have the investments opportunity, and you have something that's actually worth having in your country. It's a far more, if you will, Western oriented approach. But I'm actually hearing quite a lot of murmurs that this is kind of now the thing that the State Department is wanting to push, is that let the Chinese flounder, and anyone that is worthy of investment that just kind of breaks the mold, come in against the repo man. It's like, hey, look, we'll protect your assets. You might need an American military base nearby, but on the other side of that is you don't have to deal with China. And I await eagerly to see how well that works, and I'll close with that.
Who's playing Go now, motherfucker?
Base. Oh yeah. All I gotta say for that, I'm like, base.
Yeah. All right. I think we've did a lot of good justice to the topic. We've covered internal Chinese politics, the economy in China, its external politics, its interaction with the world, and we've been going on for just under 2 hours now. So, Tiberius, I'll let you go first with your final thoughts. What are your final thoughts about this particular topic?
Actually, I think I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say. I've literally crossed out every single note that I had. So nice. I thank you for the full 2 hours to really dig into this topic. I know this is a two-parter, but I think it's been one of the best episodes that we've done. I've really enjoyed our guest here, which is Raging Taiga, but I forgot your name, sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Travis, yes. I absolutely appreciate you being on here. This has been a wonderful engagement. And while I definitely got spicy with India, because I always have to bring something spicy, is that this has definitely been fun. And I want to just thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite shows that I get to do. And if you guys are interested in what I have to do, I'm Tiberius D. You can find me largely on Twitch and YouTube. I am the company owner of Geopolitics Tiberius D. I'm trying to get in the game of geopolitical consulting. If you are a business owner and you're looking at what's going on in the wider world and how that might affect you, I want to basically be a consultant for you and say, hey, look, this is your domestic situation, whether it's your state or your locality. Do you have the demography that supports the employment that you want to have? And what is going on in the wider world that can really punch you in the teeth? That is something that you need to be aware of in the event that it happens. So I've made all my points. Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Tiberius. Travis, Raging Taiga, going for it.
Yeah, I'm Travis. The Raging Tiger part is actually my gamer tag. I started a channel on Facebook Gaming called the Taiga Den. seeing as how Facebook is winding that down, I'll be transitioning to YouTube. So be on the lookout for that. Between my regular job and between the military, just been super busy. But the goal is to eventually have the channel up and running on YouTube. I'll try to make it the same name, which will be Taiga Den. Basically, the content will just mainly focus around tech, gaming, and essentially how tech influences the politics from the tech standpoint and how it affects that. That's sort of the area that I go into, because I feel like that particular field has not been discussed a whole lot. So
I agree with that.
besides that and just mechanics, tech, gaming, motorcycle stuff, that'll pretty much be what the channel will revolve around.
Do you have any other final thoughts about our topic tonight or today?
Yeah, we just about crossed everything. One thing that I will say is, when you start to research this, particularly on independent media, you always see this sort of these sort of crazy posts that are like, China will implode in 25 days or 40 days or 2 days or 3 days. Honestly, it's no longer an if scenario for when China's economy will collapse. I definitely think that ship of China will surpass the United States in economy by this time. I believe that ship has sailed. I'll tell you what isn't going to happen is the CCP isn't going away anytime soon. Even at the worst case scenario, they'll just be a slightly richer North Korea. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to add on that.
Well, everybody, my final thought about this is that China is going to be in the news for a long time coming. The United States and China's relationships are going to dictate a lot of the world politics situation, geopolitical space for at least the next decade. I don't see, like everybody on this program says, it's not a matter of if the Chinese economy will collapse, it's a matter of when. But even though it is going to collapse and there's going to be a severe recession that's going to cascade over the entire world, make no mistake about it, it's going to drag the rest of the world down with it due to its integration with the world. That will not remove China as a geopolitical player unless something happens internally where there's a major infighting and that leads to a civil war. If absent that, in my opinion, China's still going to make plays in Australia, Japan. It's going to make plays in India, Southeast Asia. We're talking Korea, North Korea, Vietnam, etc., Indonesia, etc. These are things that China is still going to do because China still sees itself as a growing regional hegemon. So with that, I am Cypher of Crowdsourced Politics, and this was Cypher State. We are so glad that everybody was able to join us or watch this on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast at. And as we say at Crowdsourced Politics, keep your head up through a political storm. 1 second.